Welcome to another edition of the Willy Bragg Show. I'm your host, Willy Bragg. I hope everyone's doing well. I'm sorry I'm a little late. This morning I had to ride to Wilson with my parents. They're visiting, and my dad, for her Christmas present, gave her one hell of a Christmas present, and that's basically a new car. So I was there to kind of help them out. So that explains that. Coming back home, having to get my beauty sleep. So, which is why I'm late right now. So that's my excuse. So anyway, how you doing, Warren? I hope you're doing well. Long live Billy Beer. Long live beer, period. Bring on the number, baby cakes. Yes. And Daniel Berry Sports Highlight says, what's up, everyone? What's up? What's up? I want to apologize real quick for a slight misunderstanding the other day. I said I was going to do a live stream on Thursday. It was going to be on a different subject, and I said that was tentative, but I had a live stream accidentally a schedule on Thursday that was supposed to be on Friday, and there was no live stream that was to take place on Thursday. So that's why I wasn't there. So my bad. It's just from being exhausted all the time. Yeah, I'm gonna have to do something about that as the new year starts. So my bad. I take full responsibility. So I guess I will start with basically the news of former President Jimmy Carter. And as you know, Jimmy Carter died at the age of 100. And I have plenty to say, but we'll start off with this video clip here, a real short piece on the life of Jimmy Carter, and I will share my thoughts.
Former U.S. President and Nobel Peace Prize winner Jimmy Carter has died at the age of 100. He was born on October 1st, 1924, and was one of 4 children of a farmer and a shopkeeper. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1946 and served in the nuclear submarine program, but left to manage his family peanut farming business. He married his wife, Rosalind, in 1946, a union he called, quote, the most important thing in my life. Together, they had 3 sons.
I don't know why it's doing that.
And a daughter. Carter had been a centrist as governor of Georgia with populist tendencies when he moved into the White House as the 39th U.S. president.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
He served from January 1977 to January 1981. His one-term presidency was marked by the 1978 Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt, bringing some stability to the Middle East. But it was also dogged by an economy in recession, persistent unpopularity, and the Iran hostage crisis that consumed his final 444 days in office. He was swept from office in an electoral landslide in 1980 as voters embraced Republican challenger Ronald Reagan. Despite his difficulties, Carter had few rivals for accomplishments as a former president. He worked for decades on humanitarian causes and was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in 2002 for his efforts to promote human rights and resolve conflicts around the world. In recent years, he had experienced several health issues, including melanoma that spread to his liver and brain. He died at his home in Plains, Georgia on Sunday, according to the Carter Center. Carter lived longer after his term in office than any other U.S. president. Along the way, he earned a reputation as a better former president than he was a president, a status he readily acknowledged.
Well, I'm sorry for the little glitch there. It was working perfectly previously. So, what the heck? So anyway, basically, that's the life of Jimmy Carter right there. World War II veteran, a farmer, a good husband, a good father, um, a governor of a southern state. Somebody who stood out or tried to stand out against the racial bigotry of his time, and there was just so much he could do. But he made attempts to right some wrongs, and then he became president. And he in 1974 he made his announcement that he was running for president, and nobody knew who the hell he was at the time outside of Georgia. And it was the primaries. His main rivals, I believe, was Hubert Humphrey, and I'll tell you that I think that ideologically Hubert Humphrey was probably more of my speed because he was more labor oriented than Jimmy Carter. But he didn't obviously win the primaries, so there was that. So Jimmy Carter ran against Vice President Gerald Ford, and he won, and he served one term, as said, and it was one term, and in a lot of ways he inherited a lot of problems. There was a lot of things that was also not really the fault of Ford and Nixon. I'm not saying that they were great, but the 1970s was not the best of times to be president, with a lot of problems that happened with regard to the energy crisis. It affected the American economy in many ways too. So there was that. When he that affected the economy, and they tried to manage a recession to try to lower the inflation, which didn't go well, created a lot of resentment, and made it easier for Ronald Reagan to come in and to win the presidency in one of the areas where it was to be possible. Now, a lot of people will tell you that the Jimmy Carter presidency was an ultimate failure, and that's conventional wisdom for a lot of people that remember his presidency. And he was considered, sadly, he was considered a joke throughout the 1980s, and I remember that. And the thing is, to the point where Democrats were embarrassed to be associated with Jimmy Carter. And they should not have been. I think he was dealt with a bad. He was dealt. I mean, the circumstances that he had to deal with and everything. And again, this. I would have said the same thing if Ford had been reelected. It would have been a bad time for anybody to be president. He would have inherited the same problems and had probably a similar outcome. So the thing is that he once he left the presidency, it took many years for his reputation to repair itself, and time do heal, and people look back in a kinder way in regard to Jimmy Carter. But let's look at some, and I mean, this is going to be real quick, but I will tell you a few things about his presidency where it was not all completely a failed presidency. He had some legitimate policies that actually were successful. In spite of the shit that's going on in Gaza today that needs to be condemned in the strongest of terms, he did achieve a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. And if two countries are not fighting, If two countries are not fighting, if two countries are at peace with each other, then that's a good thing. And he, and so Jimmy Carter was very much involved with that. And his presidency might have been the small break since 1945, where there might have been the least amount of interventionism that took place during any sitting presidency, And some people will say, well, that will say that that's just the case for more interventionism. And I would say absolutely not, because interventionism is, we can see what extreme interventionism has done. So anyway, let's talk about the economy for a moment. There was a New Deal consensus since the days of FDR, to the point where both parties accepted the New Deal consensus. Kind of, unfortunately, the way that Democrats and Republicans to this day accept the Reagan consensus. It was just the opposite. Back then, you even had Republicans who half-ass defended Social Security, half-ass defended the safety net, half-ass defended the idea of labor unions. Oh, don't fall for the bullshit lie that the Trump movement is a working class movement and they're looking out for the little guy. Maybe the individuals who vote for Trump may be the little guy, but populist rhetoric is one thing matched by putting billionaire oligarchs in your administration that's going to fuck everybody over with Project 25. And that's something we need to go and really put a stop to. But we can talk about Project 25 and Trumpism in another video. But Jimmy Carter, prior to what Ronald Reagan did, and Ronald Reagan is seen as the man that started this path toward neoliberalism of deregulation, privatization, union busting, tattering away the safety net. And Reagan was the open, in-your-face example of that. But that kind of started a little bit with Jimmy Carter. It did start with Jimmy Carter. And he kind of did what Trump did in regard to trying to use populism to justify this. But unlike Trump, Jimmy Carter was somehow convinced that deregulation was a way to just kind of trying to push government away as a way to try to get America sort of back to the way it used to be. And I think he was misguided by it. That's kind of how I see it. I don't understand how somebody could come to that conclusion, but that's sort of how I always read Jimmy Carter. And I just don't understand that. To his credit, and a lot of people will say, no, that's not to his credit. He did create the Department of Education. It would be a disaster if we were to have it abolished. On healthcare, believe it or not, he was actually good on healthcare. He actually supported Medicare for all, single payer. Back then, all of us lefties called it. I mean, I was too young to have an opinion on it, but back then the left referred to it. The liberals, who were more openly for it back then, they called it national health insurance. And Jimmy Carter was in favor of national health insurance, and he tried pushing for a Ted Kennedy bill in the Senate to make sure the U.S. has a national health care system, a national health insurance system, which would be, equivalent to the Bernie Sanders style Medicare for all, what people call single payer today. It didn't pass in the House, and I believe that the that the Democrats suffered not a defeat in the election of 78 in the midterms, but a reduced majority in the U.S. House of Representatives, and somehow healthcare didn't get talked about again. Hubert Humphrey bill called the Humphrey-Hawkins Act, which was supposed to get, it's actually the law of the land. It passed, but it passed in both houses. It's actually the law of the land, and we are actually guaranteed a right to a living wage job. The United States is supposed to have full employment we're supposed to have full employment at a living wage. It's the law of the land. It's called the Humphrey-Hawkins Act, 1978. And it's now the law of the land, but it's not enforced. And that's another thing we need to see that law is enforced. But it did pass under Jimmy Carter's administration. And let's see. But the thing is that as we deregulated the economy, we had inflation at the same time. There was still a misnomer that the government was just too involved in everything, and Ronald Reagan came up with this, that the government's not the solution, it's the problem, and it got to the situation where the conservatives had the idea of starving services and underfunding services to make it inefficient, so people clamor for privatization. And Jimmy Carter, unfortunately, did start that. So I have some positive things to say about Jimmy Carter, I promise you. In fact, I'm going to be 56 years old in March. And Jimmy Carter, in my 56 years, still ironically, might be one of the better presidents in my lifetime. So I want to have that understood, and I will tell you why in a moment. I'm giving you some of his shortcomings right now. When the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1980, in 1979, it was not so much an invasion. It was more of a request by the Afghan government that was close to the Soviet Union to please come in because we're having an insurrection problem right now in the country. They came in to kind of to calm the situation down, and ended up becoming a decade war. In Afghanistan, the Afghan government, it was a civil war, but it was looked upon globally as an invasion, and the United States started to help with the rebels in Afghanistan. One of the biggest mistakes of Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, by the way, which eventually led to 9/11. This was called blowback. It was mentioned in the 9/11 reports. For some reason, it became controversial to talk about blowback, but blowback is a real thing. A lot of people blame Jimmy Carter for the Ayatollah Khomeini taking over Iran by 1979. And he's not responsible for that. The reason why Iran ended up having the government it had, it took a while, but it goes back to the year 1953 when the CIA toppled the government of Mohammad Mossadegh, and whose government was very close with the Soviets at the time. It was not a communist government, but it was a leftist government that had close relations with the Soviet Union, and the CIA would not. The United States wasn't having any of that, since Iran is an oil-rich country. And a lot of people don't even know this, that the Ayatollah was an early supporter of the Shah at the time. He was not a figure that was opposed to the Shah from day one. So there was that. And what happened in what was called the October Surprise was the Ronald Reagan team meeting with officials from the Iranian government in Paris in October, requesting them to keep the hostages in Iran long enough so Jimmy Carter would have a harder time getting reelected. and it unfortunately worked. As an 11-year-old kid, seeing Ronald Reagan getting sworn in and finding out that same day that hostages coming back home, a little bullshit, little idiotic asshole like myself at that time, I kind of thought that was suspicious. All of a sudden, they're coming back home. That just didn't add up. And it just never added up with me. And I'm convinced to this day that was an act of treason right there by Ronald Reagan and all his cohorts that were involved with this negotiating with the officials from the Iranian government in Paris in October of 1980. So there was that. And Jimmy Carter was defeated in 1980 as a result. Plus, again, domestically, not having a great relationship with with Congress, other international issues such as the agreement with the Panamanian government, the so-called giveaway of the Panama Canal, and I can't believe that people talking about taking back the Panama Canal. All this was just was at a feverish point, boiling point, where Ronald Reagan was to get elected in 1980. So, but the thing about it is that Jimmy Carter prioritized human rights abroad. Unlike other presidents who don't give a damn about human rights. And people thought that was a weakness on his part. And I thought, no, it was actually a strength. It was actually a strength on his part. And unfortunately, people didn't see it that way. Jimmy Carter was seen, even back then, and Jimmy Carter is a Zionist, was a Zionist when he was alive, but he was seen as too pro-Palestinian. And some people even said that Jimmy Carter was an anti-Semite, which is a vicious, vicious lie. He met with Hamas leaders. He met with other people around the world. He worked abroad to try to work for peace between people from around the world. I mean, you compare that. You compare Jimmy Carter, who was a Sunday school teacher, an evangelical of all people. I mean, I have my opinions on evangelicals. He was that, but he was not a nutcase intolerant person. And you compare that to a John Hagee or Jerry Falwell or someone like that. I mean, give me Jimmy Carter any day. Seriously. Look what he did after he exited out of the White House. Habitat for Humanity. He built homes domestically for people in need, for the poor. What did all these other presidents from both parties, what the hell did they do? They get paid $5,000, $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 for speeches at universities, foundations, or whatever. Jimmy Carter didn't do that. Jimmy Carter was the best former president we've ever had. Oh, and let me also before I forget, mention that he pardoned a lot of the draft dodgers from the Vietnam War. Awesome. And he did have a favorable view towards civil liberties. So in ways that other presidents after him seem to have expressed disdain for. And so Jimmy Carter's record, like anybody's records, can be considered spotty, but Jimmy Carter was essentially a good man, not a perfect man, but a good man under the circumstances, trying to do the best he could. He made some misjudgments, and I mentioned some of the misjudgments he made, and there was that, but he also tried to repair what was wrong with this country as a result of what was the result of the Watergate period, where the country was kind of fatigued from Vietnam, and and everything that went on in the 1960s, which was a lot of movement for justice that needed to be addressed, and we're better off because a lot of it did get addressed, but a lot of it still needs to be resolved. So, but the thing is, Jimmy Carter, he died the other day, Sunday, and usually when a former president dies, I'm not one to wish harm on people that I despise, but I'm certainly not going to give my condolences. Like, for example, I didn't give my condolences to the CEO, Brian Thompson. I'm with Breonna Joy Gray in that interview with Piers Morgan. I had no empathy. I mean, I wouldn't have done it. I'm not saying it was the right thing to do per se, but I have no empathy for Brian Thompson. And I have no empathy for any of these other presidents, the U.S. presidents, who are all scumbags. But Jimmy Carter, I do, because Jimmy Carter was a humanitarian. He was a good man, and I'm sorry to see him go. And I actually knew a few people that knew Jimmy Carter, and they told me this. They told me in a different way, for different reasons. They said he was also a decent man, from a different perspective than what I perhaps have. I see something about legalized weed. Actually, here's a story, a little story about Willie Nelson, who was a guest at the White House in 1978. Different times, of course. He, in the middle of the night, he got up and he went up to the roof of the White House and he lit up a joint. Could you imagine that today? Could you imagine that today? Well, I mean, I'm all for Willie Nelson lighting up a joint. I'm for anybody lighting up a joint. But I just thought I was amused when I found that, when I heard that story, probably about 30 some years ago. And Willie Nelson's like 90 something now. God bless him. But it suffice to say, Jimmy Carter, rest in peace. You'll be missed by me. I know that. And that's pretty much it for me right now. And I'll talk to some of you guys here on the chat line, and I have to head on to work. Okay. All right. Chuck, Intergalactic UFO Show. How are you today? I remember Billy Beer, don't drink and hover. Max Sarjay, and how's it going? Yeah, you're right. He built houses. He was our peanut man. Peace up. Jimmy Carter and Rosalind gave so much support and attention to housing for humanity. Yes, he did. Dude was a nuclear technician in the Navy, totally built out Canada. My dad was not exactly the biggest Jimmy Carter fan, but he actually acknowledged Jimmy Carter to be one of the most intelligent presidents we ever had. Yeah. But he identified with Jimmy Carter in the sense that he was, my dad was in the Navy, so he did identify with that. Yeah, it was called Habitat for Humanity. Yes, it was. let's see here. He was probably one of the few presidents that really understood the gravity of nuclear weapons. That would be correct. And he had issues with the idea of using nukes, unlike other presidents who seems to not. I mean, thankfully they haven't used it, but they seem to be very casual about wanting to use it. It seems like he was ready to legalize weed until one of his cabinet members got busted for cocaine. Well, yeah. And that's a funny thing because Hunter Biden had some cocaine in the White House recently, and Joe Biden wanted to criminalize marijuana use in Washington, D.C. Yeah. Let's see here. Desermantis. I see Desermantis. Carter did sell out the transportation sector, deregulating airlines and railroads. And that is one of my big issues with Jimmy Carter. And that didn't need to happen. It laid the foundations for, it made it easier, made the case for the Reagan Revolution to do their thing. And if there's one thing I would resent Carter for, would be that, even though that might not have been his intention, obviously. Are olive branches given to everyone, but not many people would listen where the beast was started. Yep. So there you have it, folks. Jimmy Carter in a nutshell. Lived from 1924 to 2024. Lived a long life. 100 years is an accomplishment. I don't know any other president that lived to be 100. So, that is an accomplishment. And as I said, he will be missed. So, announcements here real quick before I go to work. There will be no videos tomorrow, no Bragglands tomorrow. I'm definitely taking the night off tomorrow from live streaming, but Braggland should be on 7:00 on Wednesday, and it'll be our January 1st show, and I'll be live streaming again Friday. I should be having some guests pretty damn soon, and we should be getting back to business. And one final thing, now I'm over 900 in my sub count. I want to thank everybody for almost the past 5 years for subscribing to my channel. That means a lot to me. It really means a lot to me. We're less than 100 away from 1,000. And 1,000, 1,000 is not necessarily a lot, but it's a meaningful number to me. And so if you can, just spread the word, let them know about my channel, and ask people to subscribe. Tell them it doesn't cost them a cent or anything like that. Just anybody that's left leaning or even an independent, free thinking conservative, it doesn't matter. Just have somebody, just let them know about my channel and encourage them to sign up or actually to sub to my channel and to let's build it up. So anyway, and February 17th will be the 5th anniversary of my channel being launched. So anyway, I'm Willy Bragg. If you like what you heard, please press like, and please press like, comment, share. Feel free to share the contents on this channel. As a First Amendment absolutist, it's my duty to inform you to create your own platform and utilize it, because we're all the muckrakers of our time. Reject corporate media. Subscribe to this channel as I requested. And of course, remember to free Ed Snowden, free, and pardon Ed Snowden, free. Well, pardon Julian Assange, free Palestine, free healthcare for all, and free speech. Keep it free. Y'all take care. I will see y'all later. Bye-bye.